After my beloved son passed away, I thought his wife and I would hold each other together in grief. Instead, she turned on me, kicking me out of the very house my son and I built and vowing to leave me with nothing. But just when she thought she had all the power, the lawyer revealed a secret my son had left behind, one that would shatter her arrogance and change everything. Subscribe now for more shocking family revenge stories. You won't believe what happens next. The church bells tolled softly in the distance, echoing through the heavy silence of that grey morning. I stood at my son Daniel's grave, clutching the handle of my cane tighter than I had in years. My body shook, not from age but from the unbearable grief that gnawed at my chest. Daniel was gone. My only son, my pride, the reason I woke up each day, lowered into the cold earth far too soon. Beside me, his wife, Sophia, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. She looked every bit the grieving widow, her black dress immaculate, her face pale, her tears catching the sympathy of everyone around us. To the outside world, she appeared fragile, broken, lost. But even as I stood there, numb and hollow, something deep in my gut whispered that her tears weren't all real. For years, Sophia and I had shared the same roof after Daniel's accident left him fighting for his life. I had seen her mood swing, her patience wear thin, her kindness dry up. She smiled at neighbors, but behind closed doors her words grew sharp, cold and distant. Still I stayed silent for Daniel's sake. He loved her, and for that reason alone I endured. But now as the crowd dispersed and I was left staring at the flowers piled over my son's coffin, I felt her hand on my shoulder. I thought she meant comfort. Instead, her touch was stiff, rehearsed. "You'll adjust, won't you?" she murmured, her voice oddly detached for someone who had just lost her husband. "Adjust?" I repeated, staring at her in disbelief. My world had crumbled, and she spoke of adjustment as if this was a matter of routine. She gave me a look I couldn't decipher then, a look that sent a chill through me. Later I would come to recognize it, not grief but calculation. In the days that followed, Sophia's mask began to slip. The warmth she showed at the funeral faded into impatience. The polite silence between us turned into clipped words and cold stares. And one evening, as I sat alone in the living room, Daniel's picture in my lap, Sophia walked in, her tone sharper than ever. "This isn't going to work," she said bluntly. "You can't stay here forever. Daniel left everything to me, and I have no intention of taking care of loose ends." Her words hung in the air, cruel and deliberate. I stared at her, heart pounding, trying to process what she was saying. Sophia wasn't just mourning. She was planning. Sophia's words echoed in my mind long after she had left the room. Loose ends, that's what I was to her. Not a grieving father-in-law. Not family. Just a problem to be swept away. I sat in the darkened living room, the only light coming from the faint glow of the lamp beside Daniel's favorite chair. His presence lingered everywhere, in the books he left stacked by the window, the jacket still hanging on the coat rack, even the faint smell of his cologne that hadn't yet faded. This was his home, our home, and now Sophia spoke of it as if it were hers alone, as if his memory meant nothing. The next morning, her coldness became even more obvious. I came down for breakfast expecting silence, but instead I found Sophia at the kitchen table with papers spread before her. Legal papers. She didn't bother to hide them when I walked in. "What's all this?" I asked cautiously, my voice unsteady. "Business," she said curtly, gathering the papers into a neat stack. Then she looked up at me with a forced smile. "Don't worry about it. You'll understand soon enough." Her smile wasn't kind. It was triumphant. Over the next week, Sophia's true nature began to emerge fully. She stopped pretending. She no longer spoke with politeness. Instead, her words were laced with irritation. She criticized the way I moved around the house, complained about the noise of my cane tapping the floor, and made pointed remarks about the expense of keeping someone like me here. One evening, as I sat quietly with Daniel's photo album, she leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You know, Daniel wanted me to have a fresh start," she said casually. "He wanted me to be free, and I can't do that with you clinging to this place like some ghost of the past." Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of her. My son's last wish had always been for us to be united, to support each other. But Sophia twisted his memory into a weapon. Then one night she delivered the cruelest blow. Standing in the middle of the kitchen, her voice calm but cutting, she said, You'll be out soon enough. And when I'm finished, you'll have nothing. No home, no savings, no security. Just the clothes on your back. Her threat wasn't empty. I could hear the conviction in her voice. Sophia wasn't grieving. She was scheming. In that chilling moment, as I looked into her hardened eyes, I realized my battle wasn't against grief alone. It was against her. The house no longer felt like a home. Every corner that once carried Daniel's laughter now echoed with Sophia's disdain. She moved through the rooms with the arrogance of a queen surveying her castle. While I felt more and more like an intruder in my own son's legacy, I tried to keep my distance, to avoid confrontation, but Sophia seemed to take pleasure in cornering me. Small comments at first. Don't sit there. That was Daniel's spot. Or don't touch that. It's not yours. Each remark was like a pinprick, subtle but sharp enough to remind me of my dwindling place in her world. One afternoon, I found her in Daniel's study, rifling through his desk drawers. She froze when she saw me watching, then slammed the drawer shut with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Looking for something? I asked cautiously. Just organizing, she replied smoothly. Daniel left things messy. It's my responsibility now to put everything in order, but I could see the truth in her hurried movements, the way her fingers clutched at envelopes and files as if they were treasure. Sophia wasn't organizing, she was hunting. Hunting for control, for power, for whatever scraps of wealth my son had left behind. The next day, the real storm began. She invited a man into the house, tall, sharp suit, leather briefcase, a lawyer. They shut the door to the study, but their voices carried through the thin walls. I heard fragments: will, assets, inheritance, eviction process. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I pressed my ear to the wall, desperate to catch more. Don't worry. Sophia's voice drifted through, cold and certain. He won't have a leg to stand on. Daniel trusted me with everything, and when this is done, the old man will be out. Penniless, those words pierced me deeper than any knife could. I staggered back from the wall, my breath shallow. My son was barely cold in the ground, and already his widow was plotting to strip me of every last tie to him. That evening, Sophia looked almost cheerful as she served herself dinner, humming quietly while I sat in silence. Then, without looking up, she said, "You should start packing. Once the lawyer finalizes things, you won't have long." I gripped the edge of the table, fighting the urge to shout, to demand answers. But I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I needed to understand her game. Sophia thought she had already won, but something in me stirred, a fire I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Daniel's death, my grief gave way to something else. Resolve. She wanted me erased. But I wasn't going to vanish so easily. The days that followed were like walking through a battlefield where I had no armor. Sophia no longer bothered to hide her disdain. She spoke to me as if I were a tenant whose rent was overdue, not the father of the man she once called her husband. Every morning I woke to the sound of her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor, the smell of her coffee brewing, and the clatter of dishes she refused to share. "I'll need to buy your own groceries," she declared one morning, her eyes cold. "I can't keep supporting you. Daniel's gone and I have my own life to think about." Her cruelty wasn't only in her words, it was in her actions. She began locking certain rooms, keeping the keys jingling smugly on her hip. She moved Daniel's belongings into boxes without asking, setting them out in the hallway as though they were trash. I remember standing frozen when I saw his old jacket, the one he wore on our fishing trips, folded carelessly on top of a pile. "You can take those with you when you leave," she said flatly. My throat tightened. "Sophia, these are his memories. They belong here. They belong to me now," she snapped, cutting me off. "Everything he owned, everything he was, is mine. And soon you'll be gone too." Her words were venom, each one leaving me weaker. But at the same time, they hardened something inside me. One night I overheard her on the phone. She didn't realize I was sitting in the shadows of the staircase. "Yes, the lawyer is handling it," she whispered. "The old man won't know what hit him. By the time he realizes, the house will be transferred and he'll be out on the street." That was Daniel's mistake. He never thought about the paperwork, but I made sure it's all in my name. "Don't worry. He'll be penniless and I'll be free." I clutched the railing so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded in my chest, torn between grief, anger, and disbelief. Was this the woman Daniel had loved so much? The woman he had trusted with his life, his future? I stumbled back to my room that night, but I didn't sleep. Her words kept replaying in my head. Penniless, free, mine. For the first time, the fog of grief lifted just enough for me to see clearly. Sophia wasn't just cruel. She was dangerous. And if I didn't act, I wouldn't just lose my home, I'd lose every trace of Daniel's life that remained. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I made a silent promise to my son's memory. If Sophia wanted a battle, she would get one, but she had no idea who she was truly dealing with. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of weak tea, staring out the window as the autumn leaves drifted down. My mind was no longer clouded by grief alone. Beneath the pain, a new clarity was taking root. Sophia thought she could break me, strip me of everything, and send me into the streets like a beggar. But she had underestimated the one thing I had left: resolve. I began to watch her more closely. Every movement, every phone call, every visit from the lawyer. She believed I was too old, too weak, too broken to notice. But I noticed everything. The way she always hurried to hide papers when I entered a room. The way her voice changed, lower, sharper, whenever she spoke on the phone. And the way she started avoiding certain questions altogether. One afternoon I asked carefully, "Sophia, do you know what Daniel would have wanted for this house?" She paused, eyes narrowing. "Daniel wanted me to be happy. And that means not being tied down by burden. That's what I had become to her." I nodded slowly, hiding the storm that raged inside me. "I see." But while Sophia saw only a frail old man, I knew something she didn't. Daniel and I had spoken before his passing. In one of our last conversations, while he still had enough strength to sit by the fireplace, he had whispered, "Dad, no matter what happens, promise me you'll take care of what's ours." His eyes had been glassy, but his voice firm. At the time, I thought he meant his memory, his belongings. But now I realized he might have meant something far greater. That night, while Sophia slept soundly in her room, I crept into the study. My hands trembled, not from fear but from determination. I opened Daniel's desk, the one she had been rifling through, and began searching. Papers, envelopes, notebooks, until finally I found it. A sealed folder tucked away in the back of the bottom drawer, marked with Daniel's handwriting. Inside, I discovered documents Sophia clearly hadn't found yet: bank statements, insurance papers, and most importantly, an alternate draft of a will. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the pages. It wasn't signed, not officially, but it was proof. Proof that Daniel had intended to include me in his estate. I knew then that Sophia's entire scheme could unravel if the right person saw these papers. I tucked the folder safely away, hidden where she would never think to look. The next morning, when Sophia smirked and told me she had another meeting with her lawyer, I simply smiled back for the first time in weeks. "Good," I said softly. "I'll be ready." She tilted her head, suspicious. "Ready for what?" I didn't answer. Because for the first time since Daniel's death, I wasn't just waiting for her cruelty, I was planning my response, and Sophia had no idea the storm that was about to come. Sophia had grown bolder with each passing day. She no longer bothered with false kindness. Instead, she paraded her confidence around the house as though she were already the undisputed owner, her smirk widening whenever the lawyer's name appeared on her phone screen. One evening, she placed a letter on the dining table and slid it toward me. "Consider this your notice," she said matter-of-factly. I unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. It was written in legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. Eviction. She wanted me out in 30 days. My chest tightened as I read the words, but I forced myself to keep my face calm. If Sophia expected me to beg, she would be disappointed. "Do you understand?" she asked, leaning against the table with her arms crossed. "Yes," I said quietly, folding the paper and setting it aside. "I understand more than you think." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't press further. She believed I was defeated. That was her mistake. That night, when the house fell silent, I retrieved the hidden folder from Daniel's desk and studied it more closely. Among the papers, I found correspondence, letters Daniel had written to the lawyer months before his death. In them, he expressed regret about leaving everything solely to Sophia. He worried about her spending habits, her temper, and her lack of compassion. He wanted me to be protected, to have rights to the home and to certain savings. The draft will wasn't just paper. It was Daniel's voice reaching out from the grave, telling me not to give up, The following morning I tested the waters. Over breakfast I looked at Sophia and said, "You know, Daniel once mentioned he was making changes to his will." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" I shrugged lightly, feigning absent-mindedness. "Oh, just something he told me. He wanted to make sure his father wasn't left with nothing." Sophia's face hardened, her mask slipping for a brief second. "Daniel would never change the will. He trusted me completely." Her defensiveness told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't certain. She didn't know what Daniel had left behind. Later that day, I overheard her on the phone again, her voice sharp and urgent. "Check everything again. So I don't care how long it takes. Make sure there are no other documents, sir. I don't want surprises." I hid in the hallway, clutching the folder to my chest, my heart pounding. She was desperate, afraid that her perfect scheme wasn't as airtight as she believed. That night, as I lay awake, I realized the battle had already begun. She had her lawyer, her arrogance, her plan to leave me penniless. But I had something she didn't know about, the truth. And the truth, when revealed at the right moment, could shatter her empire completely. The days that followed were a dangerous game of silence and suspicion. Sophia strutted through the house, clutching her phone as though it were a weapon, making constant calls to her lawyer. I could see the strain in her posture now. Her confidence was cracking, though she tried to mask it. I, on the other hand, played the part of the frail, defeated old man. I shuffled slowly with my cane, nodded politely when she gave orders, and pretended to busy myself with harmless chores. She thought I was surrendering. But every night behind the closed door of my room I planned. The first step was to make copies of the documents I had found. The folder Daniel left me was my lifeline, but if Sophia ever discovered it, all would be lost. So one morning, when Sophia left for yet another meeting, I took a trembling breath and walked into town. My hands shook as I fed the papers into the machine at the small print shop. But when I left with fresh copies sealed in an envelope, I felt a strength I hadn't felt in years. I hid the originals in a place Sophia would never check, the hollow back of Daniel's old fishing tackle box in the garage. It smelled of earth and river water, dusty and forgotten. Perfect. The copies I kept close, hidden beneath the lining of my jacket. That evening, when Sophia returned, she eyed me suspiciously. "Where were you today?" "Just walked around town," I answered honestly. "The air helps me think." She frowned, searching my face for weakness, but I gave her nothing. Later, as I sat by the fireplace with Daniel's photo album, Sophia appeared in the doorway. "I know you should stop clinging to the past," she said coolly. "It's pathetic. You'll thank me one day when you're forced to move on." Her cruelty no longer stung as it once had. Instead, it fueled me. I looked her straight in the eyes and said softly, "You may find it harder to move on than you think." She flinched, just for a second. Then she spun on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. That night my heart raced with both fear and anticipation. The moment of truth was coming. Sophia was preparing her lawyer to crush me. But she had no idea that Daniel's words, preserved on those papers, could crush her instead. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I slept with a faint smile on my face. Not because I was at peace, but because I finally had a weapon of my own. Sophia thought she held all the cards, but she was about to learn what it meant to underestimate a grieving father. The day came when Sophia's lawyer finally appeared at the house, a tall, sharp-looking man with slicked-back hair and an expensive briefcase. His presence filled the room with the kind of authority Sophia loved to wield. She greeted him at the door with a smug smile, her hand lightly brushing his arm as she led him into the living room. I sat quietly in Daniel's old armchair, cane resting by my side, pretending to be uninterested. But inside, every nerve in my body was alert. "Mr. Grant," Sophia said with false sweetness, "this is my late husband's father. We've discussed the situation and I'm sure you'll help me." "Resolve it." The lawyer gave me a curt nod. "I'm here to ensure everything proceeds according to the will. My condolences for your loss, sir." His tone was polite, but his eyes already carried judgment. He had clearly been fed Sophia's version of the story. A grieving widow being held back by an old man, unwilling to let go. Sophia handed him a stack of papers. "These are the documents proving the estate is mine. We'll need to initiate the process of transferring ownership fully under my name." And she glanced at me with a cruel smirk. Begin eviction proceedings. Her words stabbed me, but I forced myself to remain calm. Losing my temper now would only give her more power. Instead, I leaned forward slightly and spoke in a steady voice. "Interesting," I said, "because Daniel once told me he regretted leaving everything solely in your name. In fact, I believe he began drafting changes to his will." The lawyer's head snapped toward me. "Is that so?" Sophia's face drained of color, but she quickly recovered, laughing harshly. "He's confused. Grief plays tricks on memory, does it?" I replied softly. "Because I have documents written in Daniel's hand that suggest otherwise." The lawyer straightened in his chair, his interest piqued. Sophia shot me a warning glare, her nails digging into the armrest of her chair. "He's bluffing," she hissed. I said nothing more. The silence was deliberate, powerful. The lawyer leaned back, clearly unsettled by the tension between us. After he left, Sophia cornered me in the hallway, her eyes blazing. "What do you think you're doing?" She spat. I met her fury with quiet resolve. "Protecting my son's memory, something you clearly don't care about." Her jaw tightened, her voice low and venomous. "If you interfere, you'll regret it. I'll make sure you're left with nothing." I leaned on my cane, my voice calm but firm. "You've already underestimated me, Sophia. That was your first mistake. Don't make a second." She stormed away, slamming the door behind her, but I knew I had shaken her. The look in her eyes wasn't just anger, it was fear, and fear meant I was finally gaining ground. The stage was set. The confrontation wasn't far, and for the first time I felt ready. The day of the legal reading finally arrived. The air felt heavy, as though the weight of Daniel's absence pressed down on all of us in that quiet office. The room was modest yet intimidating, lined with shelves of leather-bound books and diplomas. At the center sat the lawyer, Mr. Grant, who shuffled through a folder of documents with meticulous precision. Sophia walked in first, dressed like she was attending a gala instead of a will reading. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, and her perfume filled the air, sharp and overbearing. She wore a victorious smile, the kind of smile that assumed she had already won. Behind her trailed two of her friends, whispering like vultures circling a meal. I entered next, leaning on my cane, each step measured, my heart pounding with both grief and determination. I could feel Sophia's eyes boring into me, full of contempt, as though I were an intruder in her triumph. Mr. Grant cleared his throat. "Thank you for being here. We are gathered to review the last will and testament of the late Daniel Collins." His voice carried authority, each word slicing through the tension that hung in the room. Sophia leaned forward eagerly. Yes, let's proceed. I'm sure it won't take long." But Mr. Grant hesitated, his brow furrowing as he scanned the papers. "Interesting. There are some recent amendments here that I wasn't fully informed about." Sophia stiffened, her smile faltering for just a second. "What amendments?" "That can't be right," he adjusted his glasses. "According to these documents, Daniel made handwritten notes regarding his estate. These notes indicate his desire for the ownership of the family house and certain assets to be revised." I sat still, watching her carefully. She shifted uncomfortably, her composure slipping like cracks forming in glass. "What nonsense," she snapped. "Those notes can't possibly be valid. Daniel promised everything to me. He told me." Mr. Grant held up a page. "These are in his handwriting, dated just weeks before his death. It specifically mentions, and I quote, 'I want my father to remain secure in the family home. He should never be forced out.'" Silence engulfed the room. My throat tightened, emotions welling up, but I forced myself to remain composed. Sophia, on the other hand, erupted. "This is a trick," she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "He probably pressured Daniel into writing this. Look at him sitting there smugly." Her voice cracked, and in that crack lay her fear. I finally spoke, my voice low but steady. "Daniel loved you, Sophia." But even he began to see the truth. "He knew your heart was filled with greed, not love. That's why he made those changes." Her eyes widened, a mixture of rage and desperation flashing through them. "You old fool, you think you've won?" "This isn't over." But for the first time, the confidence in her voice wavered. Mr. Grant folded his hands, his tone final. "We will need to verify everything legally, but if these amendments hold, then the property and assets are not entirely yours. Mrs. Collins, Mr. Collins Sr. has protections. The blood drained from Sophia's face. Her victory was slipping piece by piece, right through her manicured fingers, and in that moment I realized the battle was no longer hers alone to fight. The truth had finally entered the room. Sophia's hands trembled as she reached for the papers on the table, her perfectly painted nails tapping against the wood in frustration. No, this isn't real," she stammered. "Daniel would never put him above me. We were married, for heaven's sake. Everything belonged to us as a couple." Mr. Grant didn't flinch. He calmly adjusted the documents and pushed a copy toward her. "Mrs. Collins, these are notarized notes, accompanied by Daniel's signature. They were filed discreetly before his passing. Legally speaking, they hold significant weight." Her voice rose an octave, shrill and desperate. "Do you think I'll just accept this? I'll fight it. I'll take this to court and expose every lie." I remained quiet, letting her words echo against the paneled walls. It was the first time I saw her truly rattled. The confidence that once dripped from her every movement had been replaced with cracks of fear. She was beginning to realize her empire of arrogance was built on sand. Mr. Grant clasped his hands together. "Of course, you have every right to contest. But keep in mind, Daniel was thorough. He wrote very specific instructions. He wanted his father to remain in the home with full financial security until his last day. Any attempt to remove him would be considered a breach of Daniel's final wishes." Sophia's lips quivered. She turned to her friends, who sat silently behind her, now avoiding eye contact as if embarrassed by the scene unfolding. She sought their support, but found only discomfort in their blank stares. I finally spoke, my voice slow and deliberate. "You thought throwing me out would make me powerless. But Daniel saw what I couldn't at first, your hunger for control. He wanted to make sure I'd never be left on the street because of you." Her face reddened, and she slammed her fists on the table. "You're lying. You poisoned him against me." For the first time, I allowed my composure to falter just slightly. My eyes burned with tears I had held back for months. "I never poisoned him. You did that all on your own, Sophia. Every cruel word, every selfish act, you showed him who you really were. And now your mask has fallen." Sophia recoiled as if struck. She looked to Mr. Grant again, her voice shrinking. This can't be happening. He promised me everything. I deserve everything." The lawyer's expression remained neutral, though his tone carried a weight of finality. "Deserve is a dangerous word, Mrs. Collins. What Daniel wanted was justice. And justice doesn't always look the way we expect it to." Silence settled over the room once more. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, each tick cutting deeper into Sophia's panic. Her hands shook as she stuffed the documents back onto the desk, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "If you think this will stop me, you're wrong. I'll destroy every shred of this so-called evidence." Mr. Grant leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Be very careful, Mrs. Collins. Interfering with a legal will is a federal crime. Everything here is already documented and secured. Even if you burn these papers, multiple copies exist in safe hands." Sophia froze. Her bluster, her threats, her entire performance collapsed under the weight of reality. She sank back into her chair, her eyes darting from me to the lawyer, realizing for the first time that her control was slipping away completely. I sat taller, not with arrogance, but with the quiet strength of a man finally vindicated. Daniel's voice echoed in my heart, as though he were still in the room. "Don't worry, Dad, I'll protect you." And in that moment I knew. The tide had fully turned. Sophia's breathing grew heavier, her chest rising and falling with every shallow gasp. She wasn't the composed widow anymore. She looked cornered, like a predator realizing the trap had been sprung. Her eyes darted to the lawyer, then to me, and finally to the door as if she was plotting her escape. "You all think you're so clever," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "But you have no idea what Daniel told me in private. He said he wanted me to handle everything. He trusted me. These papers, these so-called notes, are nothing compared to the promises he made me face to face." Mr. Grant remained calm. "Verbal promises, Mrs. Collins, mean nothing without legal documentation. Daniel made sure his final intentions were written and protected. That's what stands in this office today." Her fists clenched, and for a moment I thought she might leap across the table. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, I won't let you take this away from me. I gave years of my life to him, I stood by his side, and now you expect me to believe he chose you, an old man, over me." I met her glare without flinching. My voice cracked with grief but also with truth. "He didn't choose one over the other, Sophia. He chose to protect what mattered. He knew you had already stopped loving him. You only loved what he provided. He wanted to make sure that after he was gone, you couldn't use me as your final stepping stone." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked like she was at a loss. Her eyes glistened with frustrated tears, but they weren't born of sorrow, they were born of fury. Mr. Grant leaned forward. "There's more." His tone was deliberate, each syllable echoing like a hammer striking an anvil. "Daniel also left a trust account in his father's name, substantial enough to ensure he will never be financially dependent on anyone. That account is untouchable, secured in multiple institutions. Your access is non-existent." The color drained from Sophia's face. Her hands, once restless, now lay motionless on her lap. He wouldn't," she muttered, but even she didn't sound convinced. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. This was Daniel's voice reaching me from beyond, his love and loyalty proving stronger than the cruelty that sat across from me. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't look away. "He would, Sophia. He already did." She slammed her hands on the desk, rising to her feet. "This isn't over. You hear me? I'll drag this through every court, every judge, every lawyer in the country. You think this is a victory, old man? It's a war." But her voice cracked again, betraying the hollowness of her threats. The more she screamed, the more powerless she looked. Mr. Grant sighed, closing the folder with finality. "Mrs. Collins, I strongly advise you to reconsider your approach. The documents are airtight. Contesting them would only drain your own resources and expose you to more scrutiny." Daniel was deliberate. He left no room for misinterpretation. Sophia stood there, shaking, her face twisted between rage and disbelief. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she pointed a trembling finger at me. "You'll regret this. Both of you." I rose too, my legs weak but steady, my cane tapping against the wooden floor. "No, Sophia. The only one who will regret anything is you. You lost the man who loved you, and instead of honoring his memory, you tried to erase it with greed. That will haunt you longer than any legal battle." Her mouth opened as if to fire back, but nothing came. The words died before they could leave her lips. She turned sharply, storming toward the door, her heels echoing like thunder in the tense silence. Her friends scrambled after her, whispering furiously, their earlier smugness replaced with embarrassment. The door slammed shut, leaving only the sound of my own shaky breath. Mr. Grant looked at me, his stern face softening. "Daniel was a wise man. He wanted you to know he never forgot what you meant to him." My knees nearly gave way, but I steadied myself. A mix of sorrow and relief surged through me. Sophia had stormed out, but Daniel's voice, his love, his final gift, it remained. For the first time since my son's death, I felt like I could breathe again. The silence that followed Sophia's dramatic exit was almost suffocating. I sank back into my chair, the adrenaline still coursing through me, but for the first time in months there was no fear riding alongside it. Only a strange calm, as though Daniel himself had sat beside me and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Mr. Grant remained composed, but I noticed the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He tapped the folder once and slid it toward me. "These documents will be formally filed with the court in the coming days. Sophia may try to challenge them, but Daniel's handwriting, the notary stamps, and the sealed trust accounts make this case virtually unbreakable." I nodded slowly, my fingers brushing across the folder, as though it was sacred. My son's last words, his last protection, locked inside those pages. My voice trembled when I spoke. "He really thought of everything, didn't he?" Mr. Grant adjusted his glasses. "So your son was a man of foresight. He loved deeply and wanted peace for you. He made sure no amount of bitterness could undo that." For a moment I couldn't respond. My throat tightened and tears blurred my vision. The grief of losing Daniel had never lessened, but this gift, was his way of telling me he was still here, watching over me. Then the door suddenly cracked open again. Sophia reappeared, her eyes red and wild, her hair slightly disheveled. She looked less like the polished widow and more like someone unraveling at the seams. "You think this is done?" she hissed, stepping back inside. Her voice was low now, dangerous. "You may have his money. You may have his stupid notes. But you'll never have the last word. Mr. Grant's expression hardened. "Mrs. Collins, I strongly advise you to leave before you say something you'll regret. This office is not the place for threats." She ignored him, her gaze locked onto me. "He was my husband, not yours. He belonged to me. You think he loved you more than he loved me?" Her voice cracked, part anger, part desperation. I steadied my cane and rose slowly to my feet. My body trembled, but not from fear. "Daniel belonged to no one, Sophia. He gave love freely, and you squandered it. You wanted control. I only ever wanted his happiness. That's the difference." For a long, agonizing moment, we just stared at each other. Her lip quivered, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Something I'd never seen before. Not victory, not even hatred. It was emptiness. She finally scoffed, brushing at the tears she refused to let fall. "Fine, you'll keep your little victory. But mark my words, I'll find a way to make you pay." Mr. Grant stood, his tone sharp. "Mrs. Collins, that will be enough. Any further outbursts will be recorded as harassment, and I will personally see that restraining orders are filed if necessary." Sophia's face twisted, but she realized she had no ground left to stand on. With one final glare, she spun on her heels and stormed out again, the sound of the door slamming echoing like a final punctuation mark. This time, she didn't come back. The room fell quiet once more. My legs wobbled, but a strange strength carried me. I sank back into the chair, a long, heavy sigh escaping me. "It's over," I whispered, half to myself, half to Daniel's memory. Mr. Grant gave a small nod. "Yes, it's over." He packed the folder away, then paused. "Your son loved you very much. I hope you find peace in that knowledge." I closed my eyes, letting those words wash over me. Daniel had given me his final gift: dignity, security, and the power to outlast the cruelty of the woman who had betrayed both of us. When I opened my eyes again, I felt lighter, almost as if my son was smiling down at me. Sophia could scream, threaten, or fight in the shadows all she wanted, but she could no longer touch me. Daniel had seen to that, and for the first time since his death, I whispered through my tears, "Thank you, son. Thank you." When I finally left Mr. Grant's office that day, the sun was already sinking low on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and crimson. The air outside felt different, almost lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For months I had walked with dread hanging over me, believing Sophia's threats would soon come to pass. But now, for the first time, there was hope. Hope born from my son's final act of love. As I walked slowly toward the car, leaning on my cane, I thought of Daniel. My boy had been gone for weeks, yet it was as though he had spoken to me just moments earlier, through the lawyer's words. His foresight, his protection, his heart, it had all been preserved in those documents. I realized then that Sophia's cruelty could never erase his love. At home, the silence was overwhelming. The house had always been filled with Daniel's laughter, his voice, his energy. Now it was just me and the echo of memories. I sat in his old chair and closed my eyes, replaying every moment from the meeting. Sophia's fury, her denial, her desperate attempts to cling to control, it all seemed like the thrashing of someone who knew deep down she had already lost. He whispered softly into the empty room. "You did it, son. You kept your promise." For the next few days, Sophia did not come near me. No screaming at the doorstep, no threatening letters slipped under the door, no friends mocking me in the neighborhood. It was quiet, eerily quiet, but in that silence I found a strange kind of peace. Still, I knew better than to trust the calm entirely. Sophia wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She was cunning and her greed ran deep, but whatever storm she was preparing, I also knew she no longer had the same power she once wielded. Daniel had stripped it from her with his final choices. One evening, as I sat with a cup of tea, the phone rang. It was Mr. Grant again. His tone was measured, professional, but there was also reassurance in it. "I wanted to let you know," he said, "that the court has officially received Daniel's amended will and supporting documents. Everything has been verified and accepted. You are now legally protected from any attempt Sophia may make to remove you from your home." The words nearly broke me. Tears welled in my eyes, spilling down my cheeks. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, though my gratitude wasn't just for the lawyer, it was for Daniel, for everything he had done to ensure I would never be left vulnerable. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet once more, but this time it didn't feel so empty. It felt as if Daniel was there, standing beside me, reminding me that love always outlasts greed. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to feel safe, and to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could start living again without fear. The days that followed felt like walking through a fragile peace. I kept waiting for the sound of Sophia's sharp knock at the door, her shrill voice echoing through the walls, or the cruel laughter of her friends lingering outside my gate. But none of it came. The quiet was unsettling at first, like the calm before a storm. I spent most mornings sitting by the window, watching the garden Daniel and I had planted together years ago. The roses were just beginning to bloom, their petals opening toward the sun. Every flower reminded me of him, his patience, his kindness, the way he believed that even the smallest seed could grow into something beautiful. I clung to those memories because they gave me strength. Still, Sophia haunted my thoughts. I knew her well enough to understand she wasn't finished. She was too proud, too consumed by her own greed to let go so easily. In the evenings, when the house grew quiet and the shadows stretched across the walls, I caught myself listening for the sound of her car pulling into the driveway or the echo of her heels on the path. But night after night the silence held. Then one afternoon, as I was sipping tea, the phone rang again. My hands trembled as I picked it up, half expecting Sophia's venom on the other end. Instead, it was Mr. Grant. His calm voice immediately steadied me. "Mr. Collins," he began, "I thought you should know Sophia has reached out. She's already spoken to another lawyer and intends to contest Daniel's amendments. But I want to reassure you, she doesn't have a strong case. The documents are watertight. At best, she will waste her time and money." A part of me expected this. Relief washed over me, mixed with exhaustion. "So she hasn't given up," I murmured. Mr. Grant's voice softened. "No, but she's weakening. The court already accepted Daniel's notes as valid. If she pushes too hard, she risks exposing herself to legal consequences she may not be prepared for. Frankly, her chances are slim." After we ended the call, I sat back in silence. Sophia's threats didn't scare me the way they once had. If anything, they only proved that she was unraveling. Her power was slipping away, and the harder she tried to hold on, the more it escaped her grasp. That night, I took out an old photo album, one Daniel and I had built together over the years. Page after page of birthdays, family dinners, quiet moments in the garden. It was all there, frozen in time. As I traced my fingers over his smiling face, I realized something profound. Sophia could rage, contest, and fight all she wanted, but she could never take away the love Daniel and I had shared. That bond was untouchable, eternal, and for the first time I didn't just feel protected, I felt victorious. The following weeks passed more quietly than I expected. There were no sudden confrontations, no dramatic scenes on my doorstep, and no venom-filled letters shoved into my mailbox. It was almost as if Sophia had vanished from my world entirely. But deep down I knew she hadn't disappeared. She was simply regrouping. People like Sophia didn't surrender. They plotted, waiting for their next opportunity. At first, I lived in a constant state of alertness. Each time the phone rang, my heart raced. Each knock at the door sent me scrambling to peek through the curtains. But over time, something strange began to happen. The silence didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt liberating. For the first time since Daniel's death, I was able to breathe without fear weighing on my chest. I started to take small steps toward rebuilding my life. Every morning I walked to the park nearby, leaning on my cane, watching children play and young couples laugh. Their joy reminded me of Daniel's younger days, his wide grin when he chased the ball across the field, his kind heart when he offered help to anyone who needed it. One morning, an elderly woman sat beside me on the park bench. We spoke about roses, about the weather, about nothing and everything. It was the first real conversation I'd had with someone outside of lawyers and conflict since Daniel's passing. For a moment I felt human again, not just a grieving father fighting for survival. At home I began sorting through Daniel's belongings. Each photograph, each letter, each small trinket carried his presence. It was painful, but also healing. I found a journal he kept during his last months, filled with notes of gratitude and reflections on life. On one page, written in his neat handwriting, were the words, "If anything happens to me, I want Dad to be safe. He deserves peace." I clutched that journal to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Sophia could fight in court all she wanted, but nothing she did could erase Daniel's truth. His love for me had been unconditional, and he had immortalized it in both his words and his actions. Word soon spread among neighbors about Sophia's outbursts at the lawyer's office. People who had once whispered cruelly about me now stopped by with kind words, even apologies. It turned out that Sophia's arrogance had alienated more people than I realized. Slowly the tide of public opinion shifted, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone. Every night I lit a candle by Daniel's photograph and whispered a prayer of thanks. My grief was still raw, but it no longer consumed me. Instead, it began to shape me into someone stronger, someone who could carry Daniel's memory with dignity. Sophia might still be out there planning her next move, but I no longer feared her. She had already lost the one battle that mattered most, the battle for Daniel's legacy. And that was something she could never reclaim. As the months rolled on, the dust of conflict began to settle. The lawyer finalized the papers, securing what Daniel had left for me, and though Sophia tried to drag the process further, her claims weakened with every passing week. By the time the last signature dried, I felt a weight I had carried for so long finally lift from my shoulders. But beyond the courtroom victories, something far more meaningful was happening within me. I was rediscovering who I was outside of pain. For so long my identity had been shaped by loss, betrayal, and survival. Now I began to reclaim the parts of myself that Sophia's cruelty and Daniel's death had buried. I started volunteering at the local community center, where I met widows and widowers who shared their own stories of grief. Listening to them, I realized I was not alone in this journey. My voice, once shaky with sorrow, grew stronger as I encouraged others to hold on to hope. Each meeting left me feeling lighter, as if sharing my burden reduced its weight. At home, I transformed Daniel's old study into a quiet sanctuary. Instead of dusty files and lingering shadows, I filled the room with plants, photographs, and the soft hum of a radio. It became a space where I could sit in peace, read his journal, and write letters to him that I never expected anyone else to see. It was my way of keeping him close without drowning in grief. Sophia, on the other hand, had disappeared from the neighborhood's gossip. I heard whispers that she had left town, perhaps too embarrassed to face the people who had seen her true colors. Whether or not she'd resurface someday, I no longer cared. She had become irrelevant to my future. Instead, I poured my energy into honoring Daniel's memory in small but meaningful ways. I planted a rose bush in the garden, his favorite flower, and each time a bud bloomed, it felt like a reminder that beauty could grow even after devastation. On Sundays, I cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken with herbs, and invited neighbors or friends from the community center to share it with me. These small gatherings filled the silence that once haunted my home. Perhaps the most healing moment came one evening when I stood at the park, watching the sunset paint the sky with gold and crimson. A little boy ran past me, his laughter ringing through the air, and for the first time since Daniel's passing, I smiled without guilt. I realized that my life wasn't over just because his had ended. I could carry his memory with me while still embracing the days I had left. I wasn't the same man I had been before Daniel died. I was quieter, older, maybe even more fragile in some ways, but I was also wiser. I understood now that resilience wasn't about fighting endlessly, but about learning when to let go, when to stand tall, and when to choose peace over bitterness. By the time the final candle flickered on Daniel's birthday, I whispered into the still air, "Rest easy, son. I'll be okay." And for the first time, I truly believed it. If you stayed with me until the very end, you've seen how grief, betrayal, and resilience shaped this story. It wasn't just about a son's death or a greedy daughter-in-law. It was about finding strength when life seems determined to break you. Stories like these remind us that family isn't always defined by blood or marriage. Sometimes it's defined by loyalty, compassion, and the quiet ways we carry the memories of those we love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Every story I share carries lessons of betrayal, revenge, justice, and healing. Real human emotions that leave us thinking long after the video ends. And trust me, the next story will shock you even more and make you question just how far people are willing to go when pride and greed take over. So stay tuned, turn on notifications, and be ready for the next twist. You won't want to miss it.